Atlanta, 1980. Not the Atlanta you see today. No million-dollar condos, no movie studios, no black Hollywood. This was a city trying to sell a dream while something dark was happening in the shadows. Kids were disappearing. Not one, not two, dozens. And at first, nobody outside those neighborhoods seemed to care, because the victims were black children. To the outside world, this was the Black Mecca. It was a city of firsts. The first black mayor of a major southern city, Maynard Jackson. The first black public safety commissioner, Lee Brown. This wasn't just a municipal government. It was a beacon for the entire civil rights movement. The New South was being built on the promise of black political power and international business. But while the glass towers of the Omni and the Peachtree Plaza were rising, a different kind of history was being written in the red clay. In the poor hoods, places like Bowen Homes, Techwood, and Hollywood Courts, the Mecca felt a million miles away. These were neighborhoods of high-density public housing, rusted playgrounds, and streetlights that stayed burnt out for months. In these streets, the police were often seen as an occupying force, not a protective one. This disconnect created the perfect hunting ground. The blood started on July 21st, 1979. Edward Hope Smith, 14, and Alfred Evans, 13. Edward left a skating rink. Alfred was at a bus stop. A week later, they were found in a vacant lot off Niskey Lake Road. The police response was the first sign of the political disaster to come. They called it juvenile violence. They suggested the boys were involved in street life. They ignored the fact that Edward was shot with a .22 and Alfred was strangled. By refusing to link the cases, the city gave the killer a head start that would last 2 years. If you want to understand 1980, you have to understand the geography of neglect. The killer didn't hunt in Buckhead or the affluent white suburbs. He hunted in the poor hoods. In these neighborhoods, every child who went missing was initially met with the same word from the APD, runaway. That word was a weapon. It allowed the city to keep the Mecca image clean while the bodies piled up. This was a calculated choice. The city was desperate to protect its image as it prepared for national conventions and global attention. Ambitions were already in motion, and a serial killer was a narrative they couldn't afford. In September of 1979, Milton Harvey, 14, vanishes on his yellow bike. In October, Yusuf Bell, 9, goes to the store for a neighbor and never comes back. Yusuf was a straight-A student, a kid the whole neighborhood loved. When his body was found in the abandoned E.P. Johnson Elementary School, the poor hoods began to scream. But City Hall remained quiet. They didn't want to spark a panic. They didn't want the serial killer headline. This silence created a canyon between the black leadership and the black poor. Imagine being a parent. Your son walks out the door, says he'll be right back, and then he's gone. Days pass, then weeks, then a body shows up in the woods or floating in the river, and then you hear it. Maybe he ran away. Maybe he got mixed up in something. That's how this story starts. Not with a killer, but with silence. The city too busy to hate, but now it looked like a city too busy to act. Parents stopped letting their kids outside. Fear took over, and trust started to disappear. When the community realized the police weren't coming to save them, the men of the projects took over. They formed the Bat Patrols. Imagine the scene. Fathers, brothers, and cousins standing on the corners of Hollywood Road and Simpson Street, armed with baseball bats and flashlights. The APD responded by trying to disarm them. The city was more terrified of armed black men in the projects than they were of the killer. Police would arrest a father for carrying a bat while his son was still missing. This was the height of the shadow of hate. Many in the community believed the killer was the Ku Klux Klan. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was grounded in fact. The GBI had an undercover informant inside the Sanders family, a local KKK cell. They caught Charles Sanders on a wiretap saying he was going to get another little kid to start a race war. The FBI and GBI knew this, but they feared that arresting a Klansman would ignite a literal race riot that would burn Atlanta to the ground. They needed a socially safe answer. They needed a killer who wouldn't start a war. Atlanta wasn't just dealing with murders, it was protecting an image, a symbol of black success. Money depended on that image. National respect depended on it. And now, that image was cracking. Behind the scenes, pressure built, not just to solve the case, but to control how it looked. In 1981, the killer moved to the Chattahoochee River. Bodies like Timothy Hill, Eddie Duncan, and Jimmy Ray Payne began surfacing in the water. The police staked out the bridges. On May 22nd, at 2:57 a.m., a loud splash was heard at the James Jackson Parkway Bridge. A white station wagon driven by Wayne Williams was stopped. 2 days later, Nathaniel Cater's body surfaced. Wayne Williams was arrested on June 21, 1981, following the death of two adult men whose bodies were found in the Chattahoochee River. The investigation that led to his arrest focused on fiber evidence, which linked fibers from his home and car to the victim's clothing. Authorities argued that this same method could tie him to the child murders. The trial began in 1982, and Williams faced 2 counts of murder for the deaths of the adults, not any of the children. Over months of testimony, the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, fiber matches, witness accounts, and alleged sightings of Williams near the river. No direct evidence placed him at the scene of any of the child murders. The defense painted a very different picture. They questioned the reliability of the fiber evidence, noting that fibers can transfer in everyday life and can be found in many locations. They also highlighted the inconsistencies in witness statements and argued that Williams' presence near the river was not proof of guilt. The defense emphasized the lack of motive and pointed out that none of the murders, particularly the children's, shared an exact method of killing. Despite this, Wayne Williams was convicted of the 2 adult murders and sentenced to life in prison. But even at the time, the public and families of victims had questions. Could one man have killed dozens of children in such varied ways and left almost no physical evidence tying him to any of them? Why did the police focus so heavily on Williams while other leads, including claims of KKK involvement, were largely ignored? The gaps in the case fueled decades of doubt. Fiber evidence, while compelling in court, is not foolproof. Investigators acknowledged that Williams did not have a direct confession. No murder weapon was ever linked to him, and some child victims had injuries inconsistent with the others. The tapes and investigations pointing to possible Klan involvement were buried for years, and many historians and criminologists argue that the case was solved more for the city's image than for justice. Even today, the debate continues. Wayne Williams remains the convicted killer of 2 adults, but he was never convicted of killing a child. The city moved on. Headlines faded, but for the families in Atlanta's poorest neighborhoods, the real questions linger. Was Williams a serial killer, as authorities claimed, or was he a convenient scapegoat whose conviction allowed Atlanta to declare the crisis over? The unanswered questions, the missing justice, are part of the city's memory. The red clay of the city, the silence of the projects, the children whose names are whispered in pain, all remind us that the truth is often more complicated than the verdict.